By the age of 22, she had made millions, only no more, than she ever earned in one contract. In the next minutes, you'll uncover 3 truths about the music industry. How contracts secretly control artists' lives, the hidden fees that vanish their earnings, and the stories of stars who fought, and sometimes lost, against the system. Subscribe, and stay until the end for the facts that will change how you hear your favorite music. From the very beginning of recorded music, artists have faced a paradox: creativity versus control. While fans see the glamour of sold-out arenas and platinum records, the reality behind the studio doors has always been far more complex. This documentary traces the evolution of record labels, explores the landmark contracts that shaped the industry, and reveals the personal toll on some of the world's most iconic artists. This story begins not with the musicians themselves, but with the corporations that financed, promoted, and ultimately controlled them. A tale of innovation, ambition, and exploitation that spans decades. Early years. From Tin Pan Alley to the birth of the record label. The modern music industry traces its roots to the early 20th century. In 1910, Tin Pan Alley songwriters in New York were creating sheet music for mass consumption, but the profits rarely reached the composers. Enter the Victor Talking Machine Company, one of the first to recognize the commercial potential of recorded music. By the 1920s, labels like Columbia Records and RCA Victor were not only producing music, they were packaging fame. Contracts were simple on paper: a flat fee for recordings. But the fine print already favored the company, laying the groundwork for what would become the record label trap. Artists often had no rights to their masters or royalties, leaving them dependent on the label's discretion. During the 1930s and 1940s, jazz and blues performers, such as Bessie Smith and Robert Johnson, signed contracts that promised national exposure, but delivered minimal financial reward. Johnson, who recorded in 1936, sold the rights to his music for just a few dollars. A deal that would make him a posthumous legend, but left him penniless in life. The post-war era saw the rise of independent labels like Sun Records and Chess Records, which brought African-American music to wider audiences. Artists such as Chuck Berry and Little Richard achieved fame, yet contracts remained skewed. Advances were recoupable against future earnings, studio control was absolute, and royalty statements were opaque. The seeds of systemic exploitation were planted early. Artists were celebrated publicly, but constrained financially. The 1950s and 1960s marked a revolution in popular music. Rock and roll erupted, and labels suddenly wielded unprecedented power. Elvis Presley, signed to RCA Victor in 1955, became an international sensation. Yet his contracts were dominated by his management and label. The infamous artist as employee clauses ensured that even as Presley sold millions of records, he earned only a fraction of the revenue, with the rest flowing directly to RCA and his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Motown, founded in 1959 by Berry Gordy, symbolized both innovation and control. The label pioneered artist development, choreography, and image management, creating a factory of hits. Yet every Motown act, from the Supremes to Stevie Wonder, signed contracts that stripped them of master ownership and limited their creative freedom. Many artists later described feeling like talented employees rather than independent musicians, with any attempt to deviate from Gordy's vision met with legal or financial pressure. Meanwhile, the British invasion brought bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones into global superstardom. Beatles manager Brian Epstein negotiated deals with EMI, but even the Fab Four struggled to secure ownership of their early recordings. The message was clear. Labels were the gatekeepers of fame, and artists, no matter how gifted, were bound by contracts that could last decades. Contracts evolved into legal fortresses designed to protect corporate investment, not the artist's welfare. Advances, royalties, and touring revenue were structured so that recoupment left many artists in perpetual debt. Frank Zappa and Jimi Hendrix, despite their artistic genius, faced the same paradox. Immense cultural impact, little financial control. If you learn this, hit like. It tells YouTube to show this story to others. Controversy, the dark side of success. By the 1970s and 1980s, the music industry had become a multi-billion-dollar empire. The rise of disco, punk, and hip-hop brought cultural revolutions and new forms of exploitation. Labels were no longer just publishers. They were financiers, marketers, and increasingly enforcers of contractual control. Few embodied this conflict like Prince. Signing with Warner Brothers in the late 1970s, he achieved massive success, but soon clashed with the label over ownership of his masters. In 1993, he famously changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol, protesting his contract and declaring himself a slave to the label. His rebellion sparked a global conversation about artistic freedom and ownership, and the emotional cost of contractual bondage. Hip-hop's rise in the late 1980s and 1990s added fuel to the debate. Artists like Tupac Shakur, the Notorious B.I.G., and LL Cool J signed deals that siphoned off publishing rights, merchandise profits, and performance income. Labels controlled radio play, studio access, and distribution, effectively deciding who rose to stardom and who disappeared. Legal disputes, public feuds, and even violence reflected the real-world stakes of that control. During this era, the 360 deal emerged, contracts, where labels took a cut from nearly every aspect of an artist's career. Touring, endorsements, merchandise, even brand collaborations. Marketed as partnerships, these agreements often locked artists into financial dependence, disguised as opportunity. The late 1990s and early 2000s ushered in a new generation of artists demanding autonomy. Courtney Love, Khalees, and later pop stars, like Kesha and Taylor Swift, publicly challenged the power of labels. Contracts often prohibited outside collaborations, dictated release schedules, and imposed creative restrictions. Swift's battle over her masters with Big Machine Records in the 2010s became a cultural flashpoint, revealing how even the most successful artists could remain trapped by deals signed at the start of their careers. In hip-hop, figures like Dr. Dre and Jay-Z learned to use fame as leverage to renegotiate or create their own labels. Yet their early experiences mirrored the same inequities. Some artists regained control by buying back their masters. Others founded independent imprints to break the cycle. Many, however, remained caught between global success and personal disillusionment. The emotional toll was undeniable. Artists spoke openly about mental health struggles, family strain, and burnout. Fame, it seemed, came at the price of personal peace. As one artist described it, it's like being a prisoner in a golden cage. Industry evolution. The digital revolution. The rise of digital distribution and platforms like iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube transformed the landscape of music. For the first time, artists could reach global audiences without a label. But contracts adapted quickly. The 360 deal became standard, and labels shifted focus to capturing every revenue stream. Streaming royalties, live performances, social media presence, and merchandising. Artists like Chance the Rapper and Macklemore demonstrated the potential of independence, building massive fan bases without traditional label backing. Yet mainstream labels retained dominance through global marketing, playlisting, and award recognition. Modern contracts grew more intricate, requiring entire legal teams to decode. The paradox endured. Technology empowered artists, but also expanded the ways companies could profit from them. High-profile disputes, Kesha versus Dr. Luke, JoJo versus Blackground Records, Frank Ocean's split from Def Jam, revealed that, despite digital democratization, structural control remained deeply entrenched. How contracts shaped music and society? Record label contracts have shaped not just careers, but entire cultural movements. Labels dictated which genres reached the mainstream and which were buried. The rise of teen pop in the 1990s, the dominance of hip-hop in the 2000s, and the commercialization of indie music all unfolded within corporate frameworks designed for maximum profitability. Some movements, punk, grunge, underground rap, rebelled against this structure entirely, championing independence as an act of resistance. Yet even their success stories often led back to major labels, hungry to repackage rebellion into marketable culture. This control extended far beyond music. Fashion, film, and social trends mirrored the aesthetic choices labels promoted. The result? Corporate contracts didn't just define what we heard, they shaped how we saw ourselves. Behind the platinum plaques and sold-out tours lies a hidden human cost. Lost ownership, emotional exhaustion, and shattered trust. The struggle between creativity and control is, at its core, a story about power, and the price of chasing it. The history of record label contracts stands as a cautionary tale about art, commerce, and control. While labels have launched countless careers, their agreements have often prioritized corporate protection over creative freedom. This story reminds us that music is more than what charts on Billboard. It's about ownership, integrity, and resilience. As independent platforms continue to rise, the balance of power begins to shift, yet the lessons endure. Early contracts can bind artists for decades, fame carries hidden costs, and true change requires transparency and awareness. How much control should a company have over a creator's work? Should fame justify surrendering artistic rights? Or can the system evolve to truly empower those who create the soundtracks of our lives? Subscribe and hit bell. New music documentary on Tuesday and Thursday. Watch next stories on the channel.